All right, let's talk about proteins. We've all heard of proteins before. Protein is a very important part of our diet, and that's kind of what we're used to thinking about it as. That's a nutrient that you consume through your foods, but in reality, why do you need all those proteins? Yes, you can get energy from proteins, but you really, in large part, you need the monomers, the building blocks of the proteins of the foods that you're eating, so that you can absorb those and use those as your own monomers to build your own proteins. And that's because there are many different kinds of proteins that cells make, and they play lots of different roles. So these are an extremely important type of organic molecule that cells use. Okay, so proteins are polymers. So a protein is going to be a chain of monomers, and in this case, we got another new word here, amino acids. Okay, so amino acids are the monomers of proteins, and there are 20 different types of amino acids that your cells use. They have names like methionine and leucine and valine and isoleucine and phenylalanine. They have lots of different names. You may have heard of tryptophan before. It's present in turkey, and it's thought to play a role in making us sleepy after you eat a lot of turkey. So 20 different kinds. If you ever take a protein supplement or a protein shake, a lot of times on the powder ingredients, they'll let you know what types of amino acids you're getting by consuming that protein shake. So they are bonded together in chains. The bonds between amino acids are called peptide bonds. So if you got an amino acid here and it is covalently bonded to amino acid number 2 over here, that bond is called a peptide bond. All right, what atoms are they built from? Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. Amino acids always have nitrogen in them. Sometimes sulfur, sometimes phosphorus you'll have in these types of molecules. As I mentioned, they're very diverse. So many of them that your cells produce are enzymes. Enzymes, we'll talk more about enzymes later. Those are little machines that carry out chemical reactions. So we've talked about chemical reactions already, and all living things produce enzymes to make those chemical reactions happen more efficiently. Otherwise, you would not survive. So, and enzymes usually are protein molecules. So I said they're kind of like a machine, but that machine is actually a protein molecule. Proteins can be involved in transporting things throughout your body. For example, when you guys take Biology 202, you'll learn about a protein called hemoglobin that is present in your red blood cells, and it binds oxygen gas that you breathe in from the atmosphere and transports that oxygen gas to all parts of your body. You also have proteins that transport things like iron from place to place in your body. Movement. We've all seen video pictures of sperm cells, that have a little head and a little tail that whips back and forth like this, so the little sperm cell can swim around. And the tail is actually built from proteins. So proteins can be the building blocks of different cell parts, different tissue parts, etc. That also gets into shape and structure of cells. Proteins can play roles in, does a cell look like this, or does it have more of a rounded shape? And sometimes it's the proteins inside that cell. There are proteins that make like a meshwork or a framework inside the cell to give the cell a particular shape. You'll also learn when we get to Unit 2 and we start talking about the different tissues of the body. You have filler spaces between cells in many of your tissues, and what occupies all that filler space? Often it's many different kinds of proteins that are there. Like collagen, you guys have heard of collagen before. Usually we hear about it in the news when somebody gets a collagen injection, so their lips get all poofy. But collagen does naturally exist in many of the tissues of your body, and in fact, it is the most abundant protein in the human body because it is present in so many of our tissue spaces. So proteins have lots of different roles. Very important. All right, so here's a diagram from your textbook. This is showing you some examples of different amino acids. All right, so a generic amino acid has this type of chemical structure that you see here. There's a carbon in the center of the amino acid, got a hydrogen there, and over here you have a nitrogen. So we said all amino acids have nitrogen in them, and that's bonded to a couple of other hydrogens. Over here on this side, you have a carbon, and that has a double bond to an oxygen, and then you've got another oxygen and hydrogen over on that side. So that's part that they've got circled there in brown. All amino acids have that. Then this carbon here is attached to something that's called the R group. That's the part that's going to vary from one amino acid to another. All right, and it's going to make each type of amino acid unique, and it will give each amino acid particular properties. All right, so there are four out of the 20 possible amino acids are represented here. Here's one, glycine. Glycine is the simplest kind of amino acid. It just has a hydrogen there. So its R group is just a hydrogen. Here's one called aspartic acid. So that's what you have attached to that central carbon in the case of aspartic acid. Here's lysine. Lysine has all of those carbons and hydrogens and a nitrogen attached as its R group. Here's cysteine. We said some amino acids have sulfur in them. There are two types that have sulfur, and this is one of them. So cysteine has a carbon, two hydrogens, and then a sulfur and a hydrogen attached as well. All right, and then there are 16 others that your cells use and link together in, they make polymers from these monomers and link them together in different links and different patterns and different combinations to make all of your various proteins. And you will hear about proteins in all of your biology classes. That comes up over and over again. They have lots of different functions. All right, and this diagram from your text is just showing you, just like what we talked about with other organic molecules, if you want to link two amino acids together, if you want to bond them together, one amino acid is going to lose an oxygen and a hydrogen. The other one is going to lose that hydrogen. So that's a dehydration synthesis. You're losing a water molecule between the two, and then those two amino acids are now bonded together. So that bond occurs right there between the two. That's called a peptide bond. If you have two amino acids linked together, that's called a dipeptide. So a peptide is also a term for a chain of amino acids. But usually that's used for a shorter chain, like if you had 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 amino acids linked together. A protein is a larger organic molecule. You'll have lots of amino acids bonded together in the chain, and then it folds up and takes on this three-dimensional structure that's really important for its function. So a lot of times protein is used to refer to a larger chain of amino acids that folds up and has this nice three-dimensional structure. And it's that three-dimensional structure that gives that protein its function, that gives it its unique jobs and properties for your cells. All right, the reverse can happen. You can do hydrolysis on a peptide bond. You can add water back and split apart those two amino acids. This happens all the time. Whenever you eat protein, food that's rich in protein, in your digestive system, you have those proteins are broken down by hydrolysis chemical reactions so that you wind up with individual amino acids. You can absorb those into your blood, and the blood transports them throughout your body because all of your cells need lots and lots of amino acids so that they can build their own proteins. So we talked about how important proteins were for the functions of all of your cells and structure as well. So they're constantly having to make a lot of their own proteins. And so where are they getting these building blocks? They're getting many of them from the foods that you consume. Okay, so proteins are pretty complex molecules. These are large organic molecules, and they're considered to have up to 4 levels of structure. All right, so what do we mean by that? All right, so the first level, the simplest level, is called the primary structure of a protein. That's its first level of structure. And all that's referring to is the sequence of amino acids. So we said you have 20 different kinds. Which ones are in the chain? How many of them? In what order? That's all we're talking about. So if you think about amino acids as being beads that have different colors and patterns on them, which beads are you linking together, and how many of them, and in which order, what combinations? That's your primary structure. So that's going to be unique for each different kind of protein. Each protein has its own sequence of those 20 amino acids that are bonded together. All right, then the next level of protein structure, this is probably the one that's the hardest to visualize, and I'm just going to mention it here briefly. But once you have a chain of amino acids linked together, that's your primary sequence, what you have is this little stretch of amino acids over here can start interacting with these over here, and these over here may start interacting with these over here. So some amino acids have negative charges, some have positive charges, so the positives and the negatives are attracted to each other. The little dotted lines you're seeing here on the diagram, like right there and right there, those are representing a type of bond called a hydrogen bond. Remember that from when we went over the different types of chemical bonding that can take place. We said that there were ionic bonds, covalent bonds, and then a third type called hydrogen bonds that I would come back to later. That's what they're showing you there in that diagram. Hydrogen bonds are where you have two molecules or two parts of a molecule, and they are sharing one or more hydrogens with each other. So you've got a hydrogen atom, and it's kind of like a floater. So it spends some time with this part of the molecule, and then it moves over to this part of the molecule, and it goes back over here, floats back over here. That's called hydrogen bonding. When two molecules or two parts of the same molecule are doing that, it helps hold them together. It's not a super strong kind of bond, but it does help hold things together. So this kind of like local folding interaction that takes place in proteins is called secondary structure. And there are two types of structures that can occur. Locally, the amino acids can form spirals, and those are called an alpha helix. A helix is a spiral. And in other cases, they form structures that are called beta sheets. So that's the Greek letter alpha. Looks like that. That's the Greek letter beta. And a beta sheet just means in that area it's like a pleated sheet. So it's flat, but then it zigzags back and forth like that. Don't get too stressed out over alpha helix and beta sheet. That's getting a little bit beyond what you guys need to worry about. This third level of protein structure is important. This is called the tertiary structure. That's the third. Tertiary means third, like third level. This is the 3D structure. So you have this chain of amino acids, but then ultimately those amino acids interact with each other and form a three-dimensional structure, and that's called the tertiary structure of the protein. So those alpha helices and those beta pleated sheets that formed as secondary structures, they all start wrapping around each other and interacting to make a 3D shape. All right, so every protein is going to have its own special three-dimensional shape that is absolutely critical for its function. Different proteins have different tertiary structures. And they've also got to maintain that shape, otherwise they won't do their job. So things like high temperatures, improper pH, why are those so toxic? In large part, it's because those kinds of things screw up the shapes of your proteins, believe it or not. And that's why those types of things will kill you, because if your proteins don't have their nice, perfect little three-dimensional shapes, they can't do their jobs and you can't survive. All right, then finally, some proteins, not all, but some have a fourth level of structure, and that's called quaternary structure. So that's fourth level. Tertiary means third level. Third, quaternary means fourth. So in this case, there are some kinds of proteins where you have to fold up more than one protein molecule, and then two of them may have to get together to make something that actually has a job, that actually functions. Or hemoglobin, we were talking about that earlier. That's a protein you have in your red blood cells that transports oxygen around in your blood. And that one, you have to have four proteins that are bonded together or interacting with each other in order to make a functional hemoglobin molecule. So if you have more than one protein with tertiary three-dimensional structure getting together to form something that's functional, that's said to be a quaternary type structure. All right, so just kind of review some of the basics on those different levels of protein structure. I know there's a lot of new terminology. Try not to get too stressed out over it. Use the practice activities, your Mastering A&P homework, and also the review activity that I have posted for you on Blackboard to help give you a really good idea, well, how deep do I need to go with this? Those practice questions are going to let you know that. You don't have to be an expert on proteins and lipids and carbohydrates and so forth to move forward, but you do need to know some basic information and become familiar with some of the terminology, because it really does come up frequently as you move through your biology and future classes. All right, our last major group of organic compounds will be the nucleic acids. That'll be the subject of lecture number 10.